Is sharpness important in photography or in your images? If you think so, the next 5 tips I am about to tell you might be useful for you. Hi there, my name is Peter Forsgaard and I am an Olympus visionary and a professional photographer from Helsinki, Finland. And before we get into those 5 tips, please consider subscribing to my channel and hit that bell so you get notified when there is a new video online. Remember that my channel is all about you getting to be a better photographer and of course about Olympus gear. But let's start. But let me first ask you a question. Do you think that all images should be sharp every time? Let's look at some images first and let's discuss that after that. Okay, now that you see those images were taken unsharp intentionally. It was all about mood. And like photography, it's about telling stories, it's about telling about your feelings. And sometimes a sharp image is not the way to go. But of course, there are situations where sharp images is a must. You can't do images like that for a client unless it's something that has been agreed before the photo shoot. But when you're shooting for yourself, if you want to express your feelings, you do not need to have sharp images if you think that unsharpness on those images will tell the story better. So my answer is no, every time images does not have to be sharp. It all depends on what is your story and what do you want to tell. But as I said, for clients, for most cases, you need to get sharp images, and let's start with the tip number 1. Use the AF Illuminator. Sometimes when it's really dark, the camera has a really hard time nailing the focus because it's too dark. There's not enough contrast and not enough light. Even though the newest cameras has a very good low light AF. But if you have a bit older model Olympus cameras, then there might be a problem. So the AF Illuminator is a red, I think it's an infrared light that will cast a small light to the place where the focusing point is, and it will illuminate the area where the focusing point is, and it will make the camera do focus better. But remember, in some cases when it's, let's say that you have a some performance on the stage and you have some black quotes or something like that, and then if a infrared light comes to the scene and lights the whole thing red, I don't think that's a proper way to do it. So on those occasions, maybe you should learn the manual focus. In most cases, the AF Illuminator is quite good. And you can turn the AF Illuminator on or off from special menu A3, or in some cameras, it's in special menu A. But let's get into tip number 2. Use different kinds and different size focus areas. In most mirrorless cameras and maybe some DSLRs, you can choose how big is your focusing area. In most cases, I use the smallest 1-point AF, but sometimes I might widen that a bit, especially if I'm shooting some moving subject, then it might be better off to have a bigger area. But very seldom do I use the whole area, or so that the camera decides where it's going to be setting the focus, because sometimes it will focus on the wrong place, and that's because usually it chooses the subject that is most close to the camera, and that's not always the place that I want to focus. So remember, choose the focusing area and the focusing point wisely. And for portraits, I usually use the face priority and eye priority. That's a really good way, and especially with the new EM1 Mark III, which has a remarkably good face priority mode and eye priority mode. And to change the focusing area, I use the arrow pad, or with the newer Olympus cameras that has the joystick, it's even better to choose those focusing points. And remember, you can also choose the focusing point from the touch screen. But let's get into tip number 3. Take the advantage of depth of field. Depth of field is always divided so that 1/3 of it is in front of the focusing point and 2/3 is on the back. So focusing to the right spot, you will increase your depth of field and will help to have your subject tacked sharp. But this is a very handy way in landscape photography. And you probably know, but just in case I will say it, stopping down will increase the depth of field. But you probably knew that, but as I said, just in case. And stopping down slightly will also make your lens a bit sharper, because always when stopping down, the image quality is a bit better than wide open. But that's usually not a big problem if you have pro-grade lenses, but still, stopping down a notch will make your images a bit sharper. And remember that sharpness and depth of field are still a bit different things. And now, number 4. Use the image stabilizer. Learn how long shutter speeds you can use and still get sharp images. That's a good thing about modern cameras, that they have very effective IBIS or stabilizer in the lens. And some, even like Olympus cameras, have some lenses that have image stabilizer and then the IBIS, and then work sync together, so you can get even better stabilizer. But that's something you should learn. And of course, when you have a narrower depth of field or longer lens, you might not get as long shutter speed as you get with the wide angle lens. But practice and learn what the shutter speeds that are longest that you can get with different focal lengths. But let's get into tip number 5. And actually, before we get into tip number 5, I will share a few post-production tips that will affect your image sharpness too. So after tip number 5, there will be an extra tip. Surprise! Learn how to freeze motion. Unsharp images is not always an error in focusing. It can be so that the subject that you are photographing is moving so fast, so your shutter speed is too long. Learn to use fast shutter speeds enough to freeze the motion if your intention is to have tacked sharp images on a moving subject. And sometimes it can be pretty fast, like a flying bird. 1/1000th of a second, even faster, is usually needed to freeze the action of bird. The smaller the bird, the faster shutter speed you usually need. But remember also that sometimes motion blur can be a good thing. It can be the same thing as I showed the images in the beginning about the unsharp images, which was intentional, because it can give you some interesting results. But let's get into the extra tip. Here we are at my computer in my office. Every digital image needs some sharpening. It doesn't mean that you need to use the sharpen tool. It means that you need to add some contrast or then use the dehaze slider. Some might prefer clarify, but I use mostly a dehaze. These tools you can also find in Olympus Workspace. Then I have an extra tip for Lightroom. When you sharpen your image, use the sharpening tool and press Alt or Option key, Alt in PC and Option in Mac, and use the masking slider. Here you can see that it will only sharpen the areas that are white. So it will only sharpen the edges of your subject. So it won't sharpen the flat areas like the sky or something like that. It will only sharpen the edges of your subject, and that is a good way of sharpening in Lightroom. But let's go back outside. And here is another video about image sharpness. There's one thing that I did not mention on this video, but I did on that one, and that is how to hold your camera so that you will get the sharpest images possible. You want to watch that video, I bet. But hey, thanks for watching and bye for now.